A fiery clash erupted last night on Fox News as Hollywood icon Robert De Niro called White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt a Trump puppet, only for the 27-year-old to strike back, leaving the studio electric with tension. The studio lights blazed down on the Fox News set, casting sharp shadows as the audience buzzed with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, sat poised, her expression calm but her eyes steely. Across from her, Robert De Niro, the legendary actor known for his outspoken liberal views, leaned forward, his face etched with disdain. The host, Laura Ingraham, barely had time to introduce the segment before De Niro launched his attack. "This administration is a disaster," he growled, his voice thick with New York grit. "Trump's a con man, and you, Ms. Leavitt, you're just his mouthpiece, parroting lies for a man who doesn't care about America." The crowd gasped, some booing, others cheering, as the atmosphere crackled with hostility. Leavitt didn't flinch. Her lips curved into a slight, confident smile as she adjusted her posture, her hands folded neatly on the table. "Mr. De Niro," she began, her voice clear and measured, "it's easy to throw insults from a Hollywood penthouse, but I'm here representing the American people, not a script. You once called Obama a savior, yet his policies left millions struggling. Where was your outrage then?" The MAGA supporters in the audience erupted in applause, their cheers drowning out the murmurs of De Niro's supporters. Ingraham raised a hand to quiet the crowd, but the tension was palpable, like a storm about to break. De Niro's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he leaned closer to the microphone. "Don't lecture me, kid," he snapped, his voice rising. "I've been fighting for this country since before you were born. Trump's a danger, and you're enabling him." He pointed a finger at Leavitt, his gesture sharp and accusatory. The audience roared again, split between jeers and shouts of agreement. Leavitt, unfazed, tilted her head slightly, her expression one of calculated calm. "Fighting for the country?" she countered. "Or fighting for headlines? The American people see through your grandstanding, Mr. De Niro. They want results, not rants." The crowd's reaction was deafening, with MAGA hats waving in the air as De Niro's face flushed with frustration. Ingraham seized the moment to steer the conversation, asking De Niro about his recent anti-Trump speeches. He doubled down, his voice booming as he recounted Trump's legal battles and business failures. "He's a fraud," De Niro declared, slamming his hand on the table. "And you're defending a sinking ship." The audience was on edge, hanging on every word. Leavitt, however, was ready. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You talk about fraud, but let's talk about Hollywood's hypocrisy. You profited from films glorifying violence while preaching peace. The American people deserve better than your double standards." The MAGA contingent roared louder, their applause shaking the studio as De Niro's expression darkened. The exchange was a verbal sparring match, each jab landing harder than the last. De Niro, known for his roles as tough guys, seemed rattled by Leavitt's composure. She was young enough to be his granddaughter, yet she matched his intensity with a precision that left him scrambling. Ingraham, sensing the escalating drama, pushed the debate toward policy, asking Leavitt about Trump's economic record. Leavitt seized the opportunity, rattling off statistics about job growth and tax cuts with a confidence that silenced the room. "This is what the people care about," she said, her eyes locking onto De Niro. "Not your sound bites." The audience erupted again, but De Niro wasn't done. He leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips, as if preparing a knockout blow. "You think you can spin this?" he said, his voice low and menacing. "I'm just getting started." The studio held its breath, waiting for his next move. De Niro's smirk lingered, his eyes glinting with a challenge as the Fox News studio pulsed with anticipation. The crowd, split between loyal MAGA supporters and De Niro's liberal defenders, leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Karoline Leavitt, her face a mask of calm resolve, met his gaze unflinchingly, her fingers lightly tapping the table, as if counting down to her next move. Laura Ingraham, her voice sharp, tried to keep the debate on track. "Mr. De Niro, you've made bold claims tonight. Care to respond to Ms. Leavitt's points on the economy?" De Niro waved a hand dismissively, his voice dripping with contempt. "Numbers? You throw out numbers like they mean something. Trump's economy was smoke and mirrors, built on debt and broken promises. You're selling a fantasy, sweetheart." The word sweetheart landed like a slap, and the audience gasped, some jeering, others cheering his audacity. Leavitt's eyes flashed, but her smile didn't waver. She leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with venom. "Condescension doesn't win arguments, Mr. De Niro. The American people aren't buying your tired insults. They're working jobs Trump created, living better lives because of his policies. Can you say the same for your activist friends in Hollywood?" The MAGA crowd exploded, their applause thundering through the studio as De Niro's smirk faltered, his fingers clenching into a fist. Ingraham, sensing the shift, pressed Leavitt. "Ms. Leavitt, you're defending a polarizing figure. How do you respond to critics like Mr. De Niro who say Trump's leadership divides the nation?" Leavitt didn't hesitate. "Leadership isn't about making everyone happy. It's about results. Trump delivers for the forgotten Americans, not the elite. Mr. De Niro's out of touch, preaching from a bubble while we fight for the heart of this country." The crowd roared again, drowning out the boos from De Niro's supporters. De Niro, his face reddening, shot back. "Don't talk to me about the heart of this country," he snarled, his voice rising. "I've been in the trenches, telling stories that expose the rot in this system. You're just a kid reading Trump's script, pretending you know what America needs." He jabbed a finger at her, his anger boiling over. "You're out of your depth." The studio erupted, the noise a chaotic blend of cheers and jeers. Leavitt, unfazed, tilted her head, her voice cutting through the din. "Stories? You mean fiction?" "I deal in facts, Mr. De Niro. Fact, Trump's policies lifted millions. Fact, your side's been wrong about him every step of the way. The American people see it, even if you don't." The MAGA supporters were on their feet, their cheers shaking the rafters as De Niro's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with frustration. Ingraham, her eyes gleaming with the drama, pivoted to De Niro. "You've called Trump a threat to democracy. Care to elaborate?" De Niro seized the chance, his voice low and intense. "He's a bully who'll burn it all down to save himself. January 6th? That was his doing. And you," he turned to Leavitt, "you're complicit, spinning his lies to cover it up." The accusation hung heavy, the studio falling silent for a moment before the liberal contingent cheered. Leavitt's expression hardened, her voice icy. "January 6th was a tragedy, but pinning it solely on Trump is a lazy narrative. Where was your outrage when cities burned during BLM protests? Selective morality doesn't impress the American people." The MAGA crowd roared, their support a tidal wave as De Niro's face twitched, his composure cracking under her relentless precision. The debate was a high-wire act, each exchange raising the stakes. Leavitt's youth and poise were a stark contrast to De Niro's raw, unfiltered rage. Ingraham, barely containing her excitement, pushed further, asking De Niro about his past political endorsements. He doubled down, defending his support for Biden and Obama, but Leavitt was ready. "You backed Biden's inflation, his border crisis. The people are paying for those failures, not you." The crowd's reaction was deafening, but De Niro, his voice hoarse, leaned forward, his eyes locked on Leavitt. "You think you've got this figured out?" he said, his tone dark. "You're playing a dangerous game, and I'm not done calling it out." The studio braced for impact, his words a promise of more fire to come. The air in the Fox News studio crackled with raw energy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Robert De Niro's words, laced with menace, hung like a storm cloud over Karoline Leavitt, who sat unflinching, her gaze locked on the Hollywood titan. The audience, a volatile mix of MAGA diehards and De Niro loyalists, buzzed with restless anticipation, their murmurs rising and falling like waves. Laura Ingraham, her eyes sharp with the thrill of the showdown, leaned forward. "Mr. De Niro, you've hinted at a dangerous game. Care to explain what you mean?" De Niro's lips curled into a grim smile, his voice low and deliberate. "This administration's a house of cards, and she's propping it up," he said, jabbing a finger at Leavitt. "Trump's loyalists like her are selling out America's soul for power. You're not fooling anyone." The liberal contingent cheered, their applause sharp against the boos from the MAGA crowd. Leavitt's expression remained cool, but her eyes burned with intensity. She tilted her head slightly, her voice slicing through the noise. "Selling out America? That's rich coming from someone who spent decades cashing checks from an industry that peddles division. I'm here for the people, Mr. De Niro, not for applause from elites." The MAGA supporters roared, their cheers a wall of sound that shook the studio. De Niro's face twitched, his frustration palpable as he leaned closer to the microphone. "You don't get to lecture me about the people," he snapped. "I've told their stories, lived their struggles on screen. You're just a mouthpiece for a man who'd sell them out in a heartbeat." The crowd erupted again, split down the middle as Ingram raised a hand to restore order. Ingram, sensing the escalating stakes, pivoted to Leavitt. "Ms. Leavitt, Mr. De Niro's questioning your loyalty to the American people. How do you defend your role in this administration?" Leavitt didn't miss a beat. "My loyalty is to the millions who voted for Trump, who want a strong economy, secure borders, and a government that listens. Mr. De Niro's loyalty seems to be to his own ego, judging by his endless tirades." The MAGA crowd was on its feet, their applause deafening as De Niro's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He shot back, his voice rising. "Ego? You're defending a narcissist who'd rather golf than govern. Wake up, kid. You're on the wrong side of history." The liberal cheers clashed with MAGA jeers, the studio a cauldron of chaos. Leavitt's smile was razor-sharp as she countered. "History? Let's talk about yours. You praised Biden's leadership while inflation crushed families. You called Obama a hero while his foreign policy emboldened our enemies. The American people aren't impressed by your revisionism." The MAGA supporters roared louder, their energy overwhelming as De Niro's face flushed, his composure fraying. Ingraham, her voice cutting through the din, pressed De Niro. "You've been vocal about Trump's character. What specifically makes him unfit, in your view?" De Niro didn't hesitate, his voice a growl. "He's a liar, a cheat, a man who incites violence and calls it patriotism. And you," he turned to Leavitt, "you're his shield, polishing his image while he tears this country apart." The liberal contingent applauded, but the MAGA crowd drowned them out, their boos a tidal wave. Leavitt's eyes narrowed, her voice icy. "You call it tearing apart? I call it rebuilding. Trump's fighting for the forgotten, while you're busy lecturing from your ivory tower. The people know who's really on their side." The MAGA cheers were relentless, the studio shaking as De Niro's frustration boiled over. He leaned forward, his voice hoarse but fierce. "You're blind or you're lying. Either way, you're part of the problem, and I'm not letting you off easy." The crowd gasped, sensing a breaking point, as Leavitt's gaze hardened, her next words poised to strike. The studio was a powder keg, and the fuse was burning fast. The Fox News stage vibrated with raw tension, the audience's roars a deafening clash of loyalty and outrage. Karoline Leavitt's steely gaze bore into Robert De Niro, her posture rigid but her voice a controlled blade, ready to cut. De Niro, his face a mask of barely contained fury, leaned into the microphone, his words a challenge that dared her to flinch. Laura Ingraham, her expression a mix of exhilaration and caution, seized the moment. "Ms. Leavitt, Mr. De Niro's accused you of being complicit in a dangerous agenda. How do you respond to that? Leavitt's lips twitched into a faint, defiant smile. I'm not here to play victim to Mr. De Niro's tantrums. I'm here for the American people, who see through his sanctimonious act. Trump's agenda is their agenda. Prosperity, security, freedom. That's what I defend. The MAGA crowd erupted, their cheers a tidal wave that rocked the studio, while De Niro's supporters hissed in dissent. De Niro's eyes blazed, his voice a low growl. Freedom? You're defending a man who thrives on chaos, who'd rather rule than lead. You're not fooling anyone with your polished talking points. He jabbed a finger at her, his anger spilling over. You're in over your head, and America's paying the price. The liberal contingent cheered, their applause sharp against the MAGA boos. Leavitt didn't blink. Over my head? I'm standing on solid ground, backed by millions who trust Trump's vision. You're the one drowning in Hollywood's echo chamber, Mr. De Niro. The people aren't buying your fear-mongering. The MAGA supporters were on their feet, their roars shaking the rafters as De Niro's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. Ingram, her voice cutting through the chaos, pivoted to De Niro. You've painted a dire picture of this administration. What's your evidence that Ms. Leavitt's wrong about Trump's record? De Niro leaned forward, his voice dripping with contempt. Look at the division, the lies, the scandals. Trump's a wrecking ball, and she's spinning. It is progress. Wake up, America. She's selling you a con. The liberal cheers clashed with MAGA jeers, the studio a battlefield of noise. Leavitt's eyes flashed, her voice sharp. A con? The only con here is your selective outrage. You were silent when Biden's policies tanked the economy, when his border failures let chaos reign. The American people see your hypocrisy, and they're done with it. The MAGA crowd's applause was relentless, their energy overwhelming as De Niro's face flushed, his composure cracking further. Ingraham, sensing the escalating drama, pressed Leavitt. You're taking on a cultural icon here. How do you justify dismissing Mr. De Niro's concerns as hypocrisy? Leavitt leaned forward, her voice steady but fierce. I don't dismiss his concerns. I challenge his credibility. He's built a career on playing tough guys, but when it comes to real-world solutions, he's got nothing but complaints. The people want action, not actors. The MAGA supporters roared louder, their support a wall of sound as De Niro's eyes narrowed, his frustration boiling over. You think you can talk your way out of this? He snapped, his voice hoarse. Trump's a disaster, and you're his cheerleader. History won't be kind to you. The liberal contingent applauded, but the MAGA crowd drowned them out, their boos a thunderous rebuke. Leavitt's smile was icy, her words precise. History will judge us all, Mr. De Niro. I'm betting on the side of the people, not the side of self-righteous celebrities. Trump's delivering, and that's what matters. The MAGA cheers were deafening, the studio trembling as De Niro's face darkened, his hands shaking with rage. He leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. You're digging your own grave. Kid, I'm not backing down, and neither is the truth. The crowd gasped, the air thick with anticipation, as Leavitt's gaze hardened, her next move a spark ready to ignite the room. The Fox News studio was a crucible of fury, the crowd's roars a chaotic symphony of allegiance and defiance. Robert De Niro's whispered threat lingered, his eyes boring into Karoline Leavitt with a ferocity that silenced the room for a fleeting moment. Leavitt, her face a fortress of resolve, met his stare with unflinching calm, her fingers resting lightly on the table poised for battle. Laura Ingraham, her voice taut with the weight of the moment, broke the silence. Ms. Leavitt, Mr. De Niro's just accused you of burying the truth. How do you counter that? Leavitt's eyes flickered with a glint of defiance. The truth? I live it every day, speaking for Americans who want results, not rhetoric. Mr. De Niro's truth is a Hollywood script, full of drama, but short on substance. The MAGA crowd erupted, their cheers a seismic force that rattled the studio while De Niro's supporters jeered, their dissent a sharp undercurrent. De Niro's face contorted, his voice a raw snarl. "You're twisting everything. Trump's a liar, a fraud, and you're his shiny new prop, selling his garbage to the masses. You should be ashamed." His words dripped with contempt, his finger jabbing the air toward Leavitt. The liberal contingent cheered, their applause clashing with the MAGA boos. Leavitt's smile was a blade, her voice cutting through the noise. "Ashamed? I'm proud to stand for the people, not lecture them from a mansion. You're the one peddling shame, Mr. De Niro, shaming Americans for daring to support a leader who fights for them." The MAGA supporters were on their feet, their roars deafening as De Niro's hands trembled, his rage barely contained. Ingram, her eyes alight with the escalating drama, turned to De Niro. "You've called Ms. Leavitt a prop. What makes you think she's not speaking for herself?" De Niro leaned forward, his voice hoarse but fierce. "She's a puppet, reading Trump's lines. Nobody that young climbs that fast without selling their soul. She's in too deep, and she doesn't even see it." The liberal cheers surged, but the MAGA crowd drowned them out, their boos a thunderous rebuke. Leavitt's eyes narrowed, her voice icy. "A puppet? I'm nobody's tool, Mr. De Niro. I earned this role by speaking truth to power, something you wouldn't understand, cozy in your elite bubble. The American people know who I am." The MAGA applause was relentless, the studio shaking as De Niro's face flushed, his composure unraveling. Ingram, sensing the breaking point, pressed Leavitt. "You're facing a legend who's built a career on calling out corruption. Why should viewers trust you over him?" Leavitt leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with fire. "Trust? The people trust me because I'm in the trenches, with them, not playing a role. Mr. De Niro's career is built on fiction. Mine's built on facts. Trump's record speaks louder than his rants." The MAGA crowd roared louder, their energy a tidal wave as De Niro's eyes blazed, his frustration boiling over. He shot back, his voice a growl. "Facts? You're spinning lies for a man who'd throw you under the bus tomorrow. You're not saving America. You're enabling its ruin." The liberal contingent applauded, but the MAGA jeers overwhelmed them, the studio a cauldron of chaos. Leavitt's gaze was unrelenting, her words precise. "Ruin? The only thing ruined here is your credibility, Mr. De Niro. You've spent years preaching while ignoring the people's struggles. I'm their voice, and they're louder than you." The MAGA cheers were earth-shaking, the studio trembling as De Niro's face darkened, his hands slamming the table. "You're delusional," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You and Trump are a cancer, and I'll keep calling it out till my last breath." The crowd gasped, the air electric with shock, as Leavitt's eyes flashed, her next words a dagger poised to strike. The Fox News studio was a furnace of raw emotion, the crowd's roars a relentless storm of fervor and fury. Robert De Niro's outburst echoed, his accusation of cancer searing the air as Karoline Leavitt sat unshaken, her eyes blazing with unyielding resolve. The MAGA supporters were a sea of raised fists and waving hats, their cheers a thunderous affirmation of Leavitt's defiance. Laura Ingram, her voice barely cutting through the chaos, leaned forward. "Ms. Leavitt, that's a heavy charge from Mr. De Niro. Your response?" Leavitt's smile was sharp, her voice a controlled inferno. "Cancer? The only disease here is your disconnect, Mr. De Niro. You call us names while we rebuild a nation. For the forgotten. The American people aren't your audience. They're my allies." The MAGA crowd exploded, their applause a seismic wave that drowned out the liberal jeers, shaking the studio to its core. De Niro's face was a mask of rage, his voice hoarse as he lunged forward. "Allies? You're brainwashed, kid. Trump's using you, and you're too naive to see it. You're betraying everything this country stands for." His words were a desperate swing, his hands trembling as he pointed at her. The liberal contingent cheered, but their support felt hollow against the MAGA tide. Leavitt's eyes narrowed, her voice slicing like a scalpel. "Betraying? I'm loyal to the millions who chose Trump, who reject your elitist lectures. You're not America's conscience. You're its critic, and we're done listening." The MAGA supporters were on their feet, their roars deafening as De Niro's face twitched, his composure shattered by her relentless precision. Ingram, her eyes wide with the drama, tried to steer the chaos. "Mr. De Niro, you've had your say. Do you have anything to add, or is this where you stand?" De Niro's gaze was wild, his voice a growl. "I stand with the truth. Trump's a tyrant, and she's his apologist. I won't sit here and let her rewrite reality." He slammed, his fist on the table, the sound a gunshot in the charged air. Leavitt didn't flinch. "Reality? You live in a fantasy, Mr. De Niro. My reality is the American people, their jobs, their families, their future. Trump's delivering, and no amount of your shouting changes that." The MAGA crowd's cheers were relentless, their energy a tidal wave as De Niro's hands shook, his frustration boiling into desperation. Ingram, sensing the breaking point, pressed Leavitt. "Ms. Leavitt, you've held your ground. What's your final word to Mr. De Niro and the viewers?" Leavitt leaned forward, her voice steady but fierce. "To Mr. De Niro, I say, the people see through your act. To the viewers, I say, Trump-D fighting for you, and so am I. We're building a stronger America, and no celebrity tantrum can stop us." The MAGA applause was earth-shaking, the studio trembling as De Niro's face darkened, his eyes burning with defeat. He shot up from his chair, his voice a ragged shout. "You're all fools. I'm done with this circus." He tore off his microphone, the cord whipping across the table, and stormed toward the exit, his footsteps echoing as the crowd gasped, then erupted in a mix of boos and cheers. Leavitt sat back, her expression calm but triumphant, as Ingram struggled to regain control. "Well, folks, that's a wrap on a heated night," she said, her voice tinged with awe. The MAGA supporters chanted Leavitt's name, their voices a victory cry as De Niro disappeared through the studio doors, his silhouette a fading symbol, of a rattled icon. Leavitt's poise had turned the tide, her words resonating with a nation hungry for her brand of fearless conviction. The cameras lingered on her, capturing the moment a young press secretary became a conservative force, leaving the stage not just intact but victorious, the roar of the crowd her unyielding crown.